Governor Scott Walker unveiled his budget plan yesterday, and a lot of it had to do with schools and school funding. So I am joined by Karen Herzog, our higher education reporter, and Erin Richards, education reporter, to talk a little bit about it. So what was in the plan for schools? And let's start with K-12.
So Governor Walker laid out one of the most ambitious school funding plans that we've seen. $650 million more proposed for K-12 schools around the state and a per pupil aid increase in each year of the budget. A lot more support for rural schools, grants for rural schools to install new technology infrastructure, to train teachers. There's additional aid in the budget for a variety of other programs that have school officials pretty excited, but we learned yesterday in the governor's budget that that massive aid increase for schools, which would be about $200 per pupil in the first year of the budget, another $200 in the second year, which really means a $400 increase in the second year of the budget, that would be tied to being in compliance with the Act 10 legislation, which means that specifically districts would have to have their school employees paying 12% of their health insurance premium costs. Not all districts in the state meet that threshold. Certainly Madison doesn't. I think their teachers are somewhere around 3% as an average. Milwaukee Public Schools has workers contributing between 2 and 14% of their healthcare costs because employees who get paid less pay less toward their healthcare. Teachers with higher salaries and administrators pay more. But this is going to be a new wrinkle. We've never seen an aid increase tied to sort of being in compliance in this way. So we're still digging on that today.
And obviously Act 10 was a really controversial proposal when he unveiled it in February 2011. It all but eliminated collective bargaining for most public employees in the state. Obviously, if the protests showed that it was not a very popular proposal among public workers. So yeah, I think we'll be reading and hearing more about that.
And you've seen districts like Kenosha where they have a clause in their employee handbook that requires conferring with the union before you make changes to the handbook. That's been a big battle to say, well, is this legal under Act 10? So we're still digging into that, and if districts have to mandate that all workers pay 12% of their healthcare costs to get the aid increase, it'll be really interesting to see what would happen down the road.
What about for higher ed? What was in the budget?
Well, the big buzzwords for higher ed this time are accountability and affordability. You look at the governor's budget, he's proposing a 5% tuition cut, which there's been a freeze for the last 4 years. He wants to continue the freeze into the 5th year. But a 5% tuition cut would need to then be backfilled with state taxpayer dollars. So taxpayer dollars would pay for the tuition cut to the tune of $35 million. Additionally, he has like $100 million in initiatives in the budget. $50 million of it is actually just putting money back that was allocated before, but that the UW system wasn't allowed to spend, referring to that as a lapse. So $42.5 million is what UW system asked for. But that's all going to be tied to performance-based measures for the first time if it goes through.
How do you measure performance?
That's a very good question. In fact, UW system officials really aren't saying much about that because they don't know the broad measures like graduation rates, how long does it take to finish a degree, are you getting a job after you graduate, are they in high demand fields, and also this is a new wrinkle too, he wants to see 3-year degree programs for bachelor's degrees. The current degree programs having a format that would help students get through quicker, which there are a lot of questions about how does one do that, what are you taking out, and does that risk accreditation for a 4-year degree program if you're trying to squeeze it all into 3 years. So there are a lot of different components to accountability and affordability.
And how are school officials responding to this, and is he getting any criticism from anybody?
Certainly. So for the most part, district officials around the state have been cautiously optimistic about an increase in K-12 funding. Schools have been cutting a lot under the Walker budgets. In the past, Walker's put more money into the school funding formula, but he hasn't allowed districts to actually spend that money, so the money has just flowed through as tax relief. Districts, I think, have been pretty insistent toward their lawmakers that they really need some more resources to operate. We've seen more operational referenda around the state where taxpayers have had to vote to spend more to support their schools. So district officials are saying, thank you, we appreciate this extra, or the possibility of extra money, What we're chasing now is the reaction to, okay, if there's a clause attached to this money, how would that fly? And will other lawmakers support that? They'll still have a final say.
What about for higher ed? Any criticisms, or are people cautiously optimistic too?
Well, considering higher ed has been cut $362 million in the last 5 years, I think there's real satisfaction with the proposal for another $42.5 million. Obviously the performance-based measures are a question mark, but there are a lot of things to look at in this proposal and how it would affect campuses and students. Allowing students to opt out of some of the segregated fees that they pay. What does that do to student organizations? There's also one measure that's going to be very controversial among faculty, and that is requiring them to track the number of hours they spend in the classroom. Again, this whole idea of making sure that they're,
Not slacking off.
they're teaching.
But how would that
enough.
work with researchers who are doing research? I mean, that's a totally different writing and researching, and those are key points to getting tenure.
Exactly, and that's
really-
what the conversation is, because you have some people who you hire as researchers and they get funding through their grants to pay their salaries. And this measure would reward instructors and faculty members who teach more.
And really, you've seen adjuncts fill in so many of those classes where they're doing the bulk of the classroom teaching,
Right.
which frees up faculty to do other work. So that's an interesting proposal.
It kind of continues with this, with the tenure battle last year. This whole notion of holding faculty accountable and faculty having tenure protections that some perceive as protections for, job protection for life. And they're trying to bring into this, more measures of how well are faculty doing.
Okay. Thank you both so much for your time. We'll be looking forward to more stories on the budget.